I think all of us have had experiences on both sides of this, right? And for me, I know the times when I have been in a relationship where I've very much put the other person on a pedestal, it has not gone well. Right?
You're right.
Like when I've over-idealized someone, that means I'm more likely to self-sacrifice. I'm more likely to have a negative self-image. I'm more likely to not want to speak up and not have boundaries because I think, oh my God, this person is so awesome and I like barely deserve to be with them.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if you're with someone who also like intentionally or unintentionally takes advantage of that, then it can be a really bad situation. And so I think I've come away from those situations like really wanting to be careful about putting someone on a pedestal and idealizing them or over-romanticizing them. And then, yeah, like you were sharing, Emily, that to be on the flip side of that also can be a turnoff, weirdly, because it can feel like someone doesn't actually know or love you. They love this ideal version of you.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
Things I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're diving into the world of romanticization and idealization. We've all been there, daydreaming about the perfect relationship, idealizing a new job, or fantasizing about living in a different city. You might find yourself thinking, if only I could be with this particular person, everything would be perfect. Or, once I move to this new place, all my problems will disappear. But what happens when these rosy visions clash with reality? Why do we tend to paint such idealized pictures in our minds? And more importantly, is this tendency to romanticize helping or hurting us in our relationships and our life choices? Today, we're going to explore the psychology behind romanticization, discuss when it can be beneficial and when it might be holding us back, and offer some practical strategies to find a healthy balance when dreaming big and staying grounded in reality. If you'd like to check up on our fundamental communication tools that we reference on this show in written form, you can get our book, Multiamory: Essential Tools for Modern Relationships. You can find out about that at multiamory.com/book, or just go to your local bookstore and ask them about it.
Emily and Jase, what is your historic relationship to Lo-Fi Girl?
Lo-fi hip-hop beats that you can study/relax to?
Exactly.
That girl?
Yeah, that girl.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like she's sort of like a metamor to me. I feel like she's always at all of my friends' houses. She's in your room sometimes.
Yeah, she's in my room. Well, to be fair, I tend to gravitate towards the Lo-Fi Raccoon myself.
Yes, and the newer Lo-Fi Raccoon, yes. But
there's like a Zelda version, I think, where she's wearing like a Link outfit.
there's
like
a billion
that one.
versions.
Yeah.
But I definitely see her around a lot. She's a real social butterfly. Ironically, since she's sitting by herself with her headphones on in all of the pictures.
I feel like she lives in a really cool place and looks really adorable and also looks like she's smart because she's studying and there's always like a cat or something with her. So just all of those things together look like she really has her life together.
Okay, that's a really interesting thread to go down because I want to hear from the two of you. Why do you think that she's so popular? And not just Lo-Fi Girl specifically, but I guess the other metamors who live in her house, right? The Lo-Fi Raccoon or the Zelda version or whatever.
Right.
I want to talk about specifically about the visual. Like many people have, already covered the whole Lo-Fi phenomenon and things like that. And that's not what we're here for.
I do feel like the visual, like Emily said, it's that she's usually in a pretty beautiful location. At least like the color palette of it is very like soft and warm and inviting. There's usually nice lighting, like the rendering of the picture is really nice, where there's some nice light and shadow, some interplay there. A lot of soft edges, like everything in the scene is very soft. But I think like Emily's saying, she seems smart because she's studying all the time, but she's also like journaling or reading or doing a lot of the things that I think a lot of us feel like we don't have time to do. Maybe is part of like she's aspirational. Like, I wish I had more time to just for hours on end listen to lo-fi and write in my journal.
And to
like she
handwrite
does.
also.
Handwriting,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something very sensual about that. And she's sitting there listening to music that you also are getting to listen to. She can look outside the window and see the beautiful scenery that she is near. And then, tactily like pet her cat or write things down. It's just, she's using all of her senses. And
that's so
it's romantic.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting because, my favorite, Lo-Fi Raccoon, there's some similarities, but also some differences, right? So like Lo-Fi Raccoon is usually in his little single bed in what looks like maybe a dorm room, maybe some kind of cozy little room in a house that he might be renting. And he's not handwriting. He has a laptop, but he has a laptop that he's kind of poking at on his lap, but then also has a nice warm drink next to him. And the whole reason why I'm bringing this up, I hope that you haven't switched off your podcast players because you're sick of this discussion about lo-fi YouTube videos. But the whole reason why I'm bringing this up is that I theorize that what Lo-Fi Girl and Lo-Fi Raccoon are doing for us visually is they're taking something very mundane and making it look very romantic. And so I know for myself, when I have to sit down to do a mundane task, such as writing, getting through my inbox, pulling together an episode, right? Where it's like, okay, I just need to sit down on my laptop and like do this work. And maybe I don't really feel like doing it. I throw on Lo-Fi Raccoon or Lo-Fi Girl. And it's almost like this, I have this example of how this could actually be really romantic and really nice.
That.
And there's like this solidarity. And it's so interesting that when I was pulling this episode together, I started looking at different lo-fi videos, and I found a bunch of these videos that came up around specifically like how to romanticize your schoolwork or going to school in particular. And I think this is the offshoot of the romanticize your life trend. And yes, I know we're a few years late to the party. This was a trend in 2020, at least it began in 2020 on TikTok and on YouTube, that was about, again, these tiny, very plebeian, quotidian, mundane type of moments in your life that we can really lean in and make them kind of soft and romantic and nice and sensual in a particular way. That's my theory.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I also like that idea of it's like this aspirational, I want to feel that chill while I'm studying. I was actually just looking at pictures right now of Lo-Fi Raccoon on his little laptop. And he's like sitting in bed working on his laptop and like the clock says midnight or something like that. And I'm just like, if I'm working on my laptop in bed at midnight, I'm stressed. I'm like trying to get something done.
Jase, I'm so glad you mentioned that because they've since changed his clock. His clock actually says chill on it now.
That's good. That's good.
Because that used to stress me out too sometimes with Lo-Fi Raccoon. I'd be like, oh no, that's not a good time.
That's no good. But anyway, but just the idea that he seems so peaceful though. So if I could be that peaceful, even if I had to crunch to like get something done, that'd be cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think so many of us are looking for that outlet to escape from the intensity of our everyday lives, that like mundane is even a little bit romanticized at this point because so many of us are like working so hard in the grind, trying to churn out content or get that next, deadline, that paper done if you're a young person or whatever it might be. And that because we do that so often, the idea of something that's more mundane is kind of romantic and kind of like, wow, if I could only just have the time to sit there and enjoy myself and curl up, in my corner with a good book and a cup of tea, wouldn't that be wonderful? Because I don't know the last time I've done that, except for on the subway, commuting to my job.
You brought a cup of tea on the subway?
No, I just sit there with my water bottle and my Kindle, like trying to have nobody come and visit me, scare me.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting though, because on the other side, I feel like sometimes romanticizing can lead us astray. I'm actually thinking, like Emily, you mentioned creating content, as if that's a relatable thing to most people. And I think that most people are not content creators, right? But content creator is a type of person that most of us interact with because we consume the content that's made. And I think there's definitely a tendency to romanticize that job or that life.
Yeah.
Very much so. That's why it's like I forget what it was. There was some survey of high schoolers
It was like
or
why
middle
all the kids want to
schoolers.
be content creators.
Yeah, like the number
Yeah.
one job is content creator that kids think they want when they're young.
You don't, kids.
You're
don't.
right. But it's interesting because I even find myself fall victim to it, even as a content creator and being very acutely aware of the stress and the pressure and all of those things. But like looking at other types of content and being like, oh, I bet they have a really chill, great life making their content more than I do. And realizing, yeah, I'm falling into the same romanticization trap of kind of thinking, oh, well, I'd be happier if that, versus like romanticizing my own life. So I think it really
Yes.
varies which direction it's going.
Yes, and we're going to get into that, but just briefly before we dive into the meat of this episode, as I was researching the romanticize your life trend, it's interesting because there's a fair amount of criticism that's come out, right? And I think this falls in line with maybe the curation that specifically like people who post content to TikTok are known for, in the sense of people being like, well, this isn't realistic. Like maybe the normal working person can't afford to curl up on a Saturday morning with their tea and their book and have it be all cozy and nice. But then on the other hand, there are people who are like, no, this is just an offshoot of things like mindfulness, right? Or trying to develop a gratitude practice for like what your life is right now. So, I mean, like the really famous example on TikTok is someone making like the most amazing looking avocado toast I've ever seen in my entire life. And this idea of like, you're putting in this extra effort not to impress somebody else, but literally just to kind of treat yourself, you know? So there are ties to positive psychology. There's, of course, the hygge trend of like, we're
What?
really good. You know, Emily, hygge.
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 No, I
Hygge.
don't.
You never heard of hygge?
G-G-E. H-Y-G-G-E. Hygge.
Yeah. It's
It's
this
a-
Danish concept. It's about like contentment and coziness and comfort.
Cozy
you know?
core.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of cozy core, hygge core.
Kind of specifically for getting through the winter as a positive thing rather than like, oh, we've just got to white knuckle it through this cold time of being dark all the time. And instead, it's like a way to reframe it and embrace
Yeah, we have to romanticize winter.
to make it not suck so
will
much.
definitely need to do that this year because I'm actually going to be in winter and not just like an LA winter.
Oh, it's going to be your first
Right.
non-LA winter. Oh my God, yeah, you're
Right.
gonna have to. You're
Look
gonna
up
have
some
to get your
hygge.
Get some hygge
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Get your
Oh
hood
boy.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start diving into this a little bit. And to start off, we have 3 different ways people have defined romanticism here, or to romanticize something. And this is just 3 different ones, but to help illustrate kind of what's going on here. So the first one is just a dictionary definition from the Collins Dictionary. And that says, if you romanticize someone or something, you think or talk about them in a way which is not at all realistic and which makes them seem better than they really are.
Okay.
This next one is from a research paper on romanticized beliefs in relationships by Angela Castellini. And this says, romanticized beliefs typically stem from the romantic ideals within our culture and include assumptions about what love is, what relationships should look like, ... And then this last one is from a more formal definition that's in that same research paper. To romanticize is to deal with or describe in an idealized or unrealistic fashion, make something seem better or more appealing than it really is. So it seems like a lot of this has to do with this kind of not based in reality, like that we're perceiving a thing as better than it actually is.
It's like putting an Instagram filter or like a beauty
Sure.
filter
Yeah.
A beauty filter,
over
yeah,
something.
yeah.
But they're
Right.
all sort of negative framings of this, even
That
though
is interesting to me too. Yeah, it all feels
Yeah.
negative in those definitions.
even though when I think of like, oh, it's so romantic, or they're really romanticizing this specific thing, that feels a little bit nicer. That idea feels a little bit nicer, but here, not so much, which is really interesting to me.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to open up the discussion to talk about first, like, what are the things that we've seen others or ourselves idealizing or romanticizing?
Well, content creation, hit that one already.
Yes, we hit that one already. Stuff like travel. This is one I think about a lot as someone who travels a ton, and particularly this year has traveled so much that I'm getting a little bit sick of it. But looking at like the whole tourism industry is fueled by romanticizing travel, right?
yeah.
And romanticizing certain destinations. And then of course, like visual social media makes this even worse, right? That we get these kind of very curated images of particular places that make them seem a lot more romantic and beautiful and picturesque than they actually are in reality.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, thinking about how we experience travel of like, are we trying to like do things to stay in that romanticizing mode, or how much are we confronted with things that kind of jar us out of it? I don't remember if we've ever talked about it on this show before, but there's even that paribyo, which is a term in Japanese for specifically like this deep depression that some people can get into after they travel to Paris for the first time, because they've romanticized it so much in their head, and the reality is so not that it kind of shatters a lot of their dreams about how great life could be or what the world could be, and get really depressed about it.
I bet they get depressed coming to the United States for the first time
well,
as well.
Sure, there's that too.
Yikes.
Yeah. I always remember there's this photographer, I don't know the photographer's name, but he did a whole series of, he would go to these like very, very famous tourist sites.
Right,
And he
and
would
turn the
like,
other direction.
Yes, he would go to the place where people always take the picture, but then he would turn 180 and like take a picture of like what's across from the Eiffel Tower or the Taj
Right.
Mahal. And it's like so interesting because it's like all the like horrible tchotchke shops, or just like people's homes, or a bunch of trash, or a bunch of tourists crowded around trying to get a picture.
Right.
Like it is that sort of jarring, like, oh no, there's a reality to this beautiful and interesting place.
Absolutely. And I feel like our phones having a lot of built-in, like, remove all the people from this photo.
Right?
Yeah.
It just kind of makes that illusion even worse, right? Where it's like, yeah, I want to distance myself, even in my own photos, from the memory of what this was actually like to be here.
That's an interesting point, is that you're romanticizing the travel after the fact as well. Isn't that a thing, that the anticipation of the travel is the most exciting and like the thing that you remember or that you feel good about the
I think
most?
we get more joy out of the anticipation of many things rather than
Yeah.
sometimes the thing itself.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I know a lot of people out there really romanticize having kids or getting married. Of course, there are people out there who love both of those things and, you know, are super excited to start a family, super excited to get married. But of course, there are a lot of really challenging things that come with both of those. And I think that we tend to talk about those things less. Maybe that's changing now to a degree, especially having kids. I mean, there was a recent New York Times article and then also subsequent daily podcast episode on the fact that like child rearing is kind of bad for your health in the manner that we're doing it now, which I found really, really fascinating. So I do think people are understanding that there was this idealized version of both of those things and are trying to come to that with more reality now than they once were.
Well, but also on the flip side, I think what gets less coverage is that people can also idealize the opposite of like being single
Sure.
and
Yeah,
not having
like-
children.
Yep, absolutely. The grass is greener kind of situation.
Yeah, there is definitely like a grass is greener quality to a lot of the things that we idealize or romanticize.
I mean, another big one of those is the whole living in the city versus living in the countryside. That it's like, whichever one you're in, it's easy to romanticize the other. Of like, oh, all these cool experiences I could have in the city, or, oh gosh, it'd be so peaceful to just live on a farm and live off the land.
I've never wanted to live in the country. I'm such
Okay,
a
but
city
Emily,
mouse. I love
but
it.
but you've romanticized living in New York for
Yes.
200 years now.
Yes.
Right?
And I will say this city has kicked my ass multiple times. It is very hard to live here, really, day in and day out. The subway is like no joke. It takes forever to get places. You don't have a car. I don't have a car. I sold my car. And yeah, all of those things are really difficult, but I still love it. I love it
Okay,
here.
and that's the thing is like I think that I don't want to get too far ahead here, but like there is a certain quality of romanticization that helps protect us and balance things out when things are difficult, when the reality of things are difficult.
Absolutely. I think that children's another really good example of that, of like, it can help you get through those hard things. Like you were saying about New York, that your romanticization kind of helps there. Another one here is the being a starving artist.
Rent romanticized that
Right.
for
Right.
people, in the 90s.
Oh yeah, there's another duo here that I want to present, which is this idea of like, I think we see a lot of people who might romanticize something like the good old days, whatever you count that to be. Sometimes it's like the good old days of traditional gender roles, you know, the good old days
Trad
of this
wife.
the trad wife, this very traditional family structure. And then on the opposite side, I'm sorry, all you lefties listening, like we also can romanticize something similar, which is like the future good old days of living in a post-capitalist, socialist, queer utopia commune. You know, like
Holy
when
fidelitist.
yeah, like that's
Yeah.
when all our problems are going to be solved and everything's going to be perfect, right? And it's not going to require any kind of hard work or sacrifice or discomfort, right? Once we
sure.
topple capitalism, and where I'm like, well, we have also a lot of examples of communes, utopic communes on big or small scale that either completely did not work out or demonstrate to us like, yeah, this shit's still hard to pull off, right?
Right.
A tiny version of that is like so many people in the non-monogamy community have this romantic fantasy of like, we buy a bunch of tiny houses on a piece of land and then I can live with my polycule and everyone has their tiny house. I still think that's a very romantic image. And also I find it so romanticized by people that like a lot of people really don't think about the reality of like the cost and how you actually negotiate and navigate these things. You
And
know?
what happens when now the house you own is stuck next to these people you've broken up with or had
Right,
bad
there's that.
experience with?
Yes, or you
know,
have you have conflict about how you want to manage, you know,
Sure.
all the childcare, the collective childcare together, and things like that.
I'd say another few to throw out here that kind of go in a group is like wishing you lived with a partner, or wishing you didn't live with a partner, or wishing that you lived with a larger group. Like, oh, I wish I had a live-in triad altogether or quad or something, or kind of wishing you had more space, wishing I had kitchen table polyamory. Like those are
like,
things
yeah,
that we
idealizing
can
it for
romanticize.
sure.
Like idealize, exactly. Like, oh, it'd just be so peaceful and calm and we'd all share chores. It'd be so much easier. We'd save money. It'd be great. We'd have sex all the time. That kind of romanticizing.
Here's a big one that I've gotten stuck in at the beginning of a relationship, especially. It's the potential that a partner might have. And that can mean a lot of different things, like perhaps what it is that they are going to be in my life eventually, or the fact that, okay, they're saying that they're going to start this amazing startup someday and they're working towards that. And so, you know, I can see the potential there. Or if they just made this little tweak, then they would be perfect. Whatever it might be. There's so many things that I think we romanticize in terms of looking at another person, or even just romanticizing the idea of another person, a new person in our lives, and what that might do for us and how we might feel better about ourselves if this person acted in a slightly different way, or if we just had another person in general.
Totally.
I often find myself romanticizing having a different job or not having a job, of like going back to gig, you know, more freelance work, not having a regular employer. But I remember back then sometimes romanticizing what it could be like to have something more stable where I wasn't always having to hunt for the next thing. And
Right.
Yeah.
it wasn't all on my shoulders. And I've definitely repeatedly done that on either side.
Yeah, I very heavily romanticize my time when I first started traveling and when I was first working on the book. And yeah, when I'm feeling particularly stressed or busy or overwhelmed, I'll be like, oh yeah, those were the days when like all I had to focus on was writing this book and just like being in a cafe and yada, 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 yada. But of course, I always gloss over being stressed about money the entire time and
Yeah.
being freaking broke, right?
Yep.
And I mean, not that I'm rich now by any means, but at least there's like stable income, you know? And of course, back then I totally would have romanticized having stable income.
Yeah.
Right.
I think stable income is not something that counts as being romanticized because there's like very real benefits to having stable
that's
income.
pretty legit. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. But some people do romanticize the idea of like, if I just had this much more money, I would be happier.
sure.
And that
Yeah.
is
Or then I could
absolutely
relax. Yes.
Sure,
Yeah.
that is absolutely true in some cases, but a lot of studies have shown like past a certain point, more money is actually not going to do much more for your mental well-being or your happiness. So that's interesting too.
Yeah.
We've talked about all of this with each of these a little bit, but can being romantic about something or idealizing it, can it ever be helpful, or is it always hurtful?
I think we hit on that a little bit, like with the New York thing, right? Where you, Emily, romanticize New York, and you have as long as I've known you.
Yeah.
And I know it's been since before that as well. And you also admitted New York's really kicked your ass. That there's a lot of things rough about it. But for you, that romanticization helps make it all worthwhile, and that overall your net experience is more positive. than it would be, I think, for someone like me who doesn't romanticize New York as much. I would probably experience more of the negatives more strongly than the positives.
I think you're probably right. It's just fascinating. Like, all of us have different perspectives on things that we care about. And I think that romanticizing something can like really shine a light on the things that we do care about and allow us to, in those really difficult times, be able to handle it maybe a little bit better than if we were more neutral about it. So maybe that is a good thing. And that can mean our relationships and stuff like that too, or like having kids. Like, I have no romantic ideals whatsoever about starting a family or even getting married. Maybe I did once, but I don't anymore. And so I think if those things did happen and it got really tough, I would have a really hard time with that. And it would be really difficult to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel there, or really take the good times and try to forget or understand that the bad times won't always be there.
Yeah, I have a very strong pragmatist streak that tends to
You
rock
don't
at me.
say.
Really?
My goodness.
I would never have guessed.
But I also, I don't think that it's necessarily helpful to just take all of our ideals and throw them in the garbage.
Mm-hmm.
So to take this like romanticized fantasy of like the socialist, queer, post-capitalist, utopic society, whether it's big scale or small scale, like I don't think it's good for us to be like, well, the reality of that is not as romantic as we all think it is. And so therefore we shouldn't even strive for that. Like I do think we need our ideals to have something to strive for, but we also always need to rectify with what inevitably happens when our ideals crash into reality. And that doesn't mean that it's our ideals are broken or, you know, silly or misfounded, but it's like we are going to have to find a way to deal with that. And I suppose that's kind of what I'm trying to get to the heart of in this episode of like, how do we deal with something that's romanticized and when it overlaps with reality, and how do we manage that? How do we come to terms with that?
I've discovered something recently about myself, that whenever someone's going to start telling me about a research study, I get excited like kids at story time. I just want to like sit there and like just a couple weeks ago, I saw my dad and he started talking about some study, and I found myself in that like, ooh, it's story time. Tell me about this study. And so I'm excited for Dedeker to give us a little bit of study story time to talk about a couple coming up here in a second and how it relates to romanticization. But first, we're going to take a quick break to talk about some sponsors. Do give them a listen. And if they're interesting to you, use our promo codes or the links in our episode description, because that does directly support our show. But if you want to support us the most directest way, you can go to multiamory.com/join, where you can become a subscriber for a sliding scale and get a whole host of benefits, like access to our private Discord server channels where there's discussion about all these episodes, and so many different channels where you can always find people to talk to about what you want.
All right, children, it's study story time. Put on your cozy little hygge hats.
Oh, yeah. Sit on a little cushion on the ground.
Come sit by the fire.
Have a kitty curl up in your lap.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. How romantic. We're doing such a good job at romanticizing our
This
own
episode.
podcast. Yeah.
Well done.
So the two studies I'm presenting sort of make a case for and against romanticization/idealization of a romantic partner specifically.
Okay.
So this first one is a 2003 study by Murray, Holmes, and Griffin titled Reflections on the Self-Fulfilling Effects of Positive Illusions. That was published in Psychological Inquiry. These researchers conducted a longitudinal study of dating couples over the course of a year. It was relatively small. It was 69 couples. Nice.
Nice.
138 individuals. The participants completed questionnaires at 3 time points over the course of the year. And the researchers would ask both members of each couple to describe themselves based on these a list of 22 interpersonal qualities, describe their partner based on the same qualities, and then describe their ideal partner on these qualities as well. And so just for some examples, these qualities includes things like caring, intelligent, lazy, selfish, moody, jealous, stubborn, and the list goes on. And they also measured relationship well-being at these 3 time points as well. And so they identified and defined this concept of what they call positive illusions, as in the qualities that people see in their partner that the partner didn't see in themselves. In other words, the ways
Right,
that
because we're getting both
Yes.
themselves and the
Wow.
partners.
yeah, it's the ways that
That's
somebody
really fascinating.
idealized their partner in a way that they did not idealize themselves, clearly.
Yeah, okay.
Now, they found that people's perceptions of their partner were influenced by both the reality of their partner's self-image and their own idealized projections. So, like, people would both project, but also be influenced by, like, basically how badass their partner thought that they themselves were. They found that people were happier in their relationships when they saw their partner more positively than their partner saw themselves. Yeah, and people were also happier when their partner idealized them, right? So like a
So in
two-way
both
street there.
directions, that made people happier.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Over time, they found that these positive illusions had self-fulfilling effects, as in people reported greater satisfaction, less conflict, and fewer doubts when they initially idealized their partner more. And people came to see themselves more like how their partner viewed them as well.
Wow.
Damn, this
Yes.
is really interesting to me
Yeah.
right now. Wow.
Yeah, that it's like the way your partner sees you kind of influences how you start to see yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
You don't say.
Well, and this
Yeah.
is also why, I mean, the study doesn't go into this, but why there's that classic example of like if you're in a negative relationship where a partner's not been very nice to you and has said some not very
That's
nice
what
things
I'm
to
saying.
you, yes,
Yeah,
it can
yeah.
also affect the way that you see yourself. Over the course of the study, participants also tended to adjust their idea of what makes an ideal partner to more closely align with the qualities they saw in their actual partner. So
Interesting.
they explain this to say that this can be a form of cognitive dissonance reduction, where people are aligning their ideals more to match with reality in order to maintain a positive view of their relationship. This is a small thing. I couldn't tell, is this cool or is this yikes?
I think it's just
Sure.
reality.
Well, okay, because on the one hand, I can see that like there's something ironically that's romantic about, hey, the more that I get to know you and the more that I fall in love with you, the more like you come to embody my idea of what the ideal partner is or should be. And like there's something kind of really nice and romantic about that. On the other hand, if like your ideal partner does not match with who your partner actually is,
And you
therefore
hear those words literally come out of your partner's mouth that this isn't the ideal partnership. These qualities and traits aren't ideal
right
for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, but then like you start to shift your ideals to match that. And so, I mean, I guess it could be both cool and yikes.
Yeah, or you just
Yikes.
realize like, oh shit, I guess I'm not the ideal partner. Can I be the ideal partner to anyone? Like this is so fascinating and makes complete sense. But also, I mean, I think it shows how important it is to have enough self-efficacy and understanding of self to be able to say like, I am good despite what anyone else thinks or says about me. And I think, unfortunately, that cognitive dissonance, it gets larger and larger over time in one direction or another.
Sure.
This was only a
potentially.
year.
Yeah.
And
that's
so,
true.
you know, I mean, if we're talking a lot longer than that, that can get even more difficult. So if somebody's saying shitty things about you, maybe leave them. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come in and I'm going to lean a little bit more on the this is cool side of things because of a couple things. One is
partner.
well, yeah, that helps. But I think the idea of your ideal partner, like what you think the traits of an ideal partner are, that those becoming closer to what your actual partner is, could partly be accepting influence from that partner.
Oh, interesting.
Right? It's like as you get to know them and understand their values, some of those you might go, oh, you know what? Yeah, actually, I do. I value that too. I've learned something. I've been shaped by you. And that's something that Gottman's talk about is accepting influence from a partner is a really important marker of relationship success and happiness, is like being open to be changed a little bit by your partner. They're talking more on like in a given conversation, but I could see that principle applying a little bit more generally as well, that we're both kind of affecting each other. And then as far as us coming to think about ourselves more like our partner thinks about us, to me is just like, there've been lots of other examples of the Pygmalion effect. This
sure.
idea that we're more likely to perform to the standards that other people expect of us. Not 100%, it's not perfect. You can fight against it, but that generally speaking, we will tend to kind of line up with what people expect of us already. And so I could see some of that being at play here in a positive way. And I could imagine how it would happen in a negative way, even though that's not what this particular study was looking at.
Now, on the flip side, feeling idealized by a partner can backfire sometimes. So I present to you the second half of study story time, a 2014 study by Tomlinson et al. The costs of being put on a pedestal, effects of feeling over-idealized. This was published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. So this is actually 3 separate studies conducted on dating and married couples. So in the first study, basically, when people were tricked into thinking, and I'm going to get into this, just hold your horses, just hold your horses. Just bear with me.
Okay, they were pranked.
Yeah, when people were pranked into thinking that their partner saw them as way more amazing than they actually were, they would physically move away from their partner in interviews for the study, right? However, when they were asked directly about their feelings, they didn't report any changes about their partner. And so the researchers interpret this to suggest that feeling over-idealized by a partner might affect our behavior without us realizing it. It may want us to put some more distance and make us a little bit more uncomfortable with a partner. Now, here's how they got punked.
Okay, what's the trick?
Yeah, the trick was that, like, basically they would separate the couple. They would tell one person, hey, I want you to list one positive quality of your partner, and your partner's going to do the same. But what they would actually tell the other partner is, like, you need to list 30 positive qualities of your partner. And wouldn't tell them that they're not telling their other partner the same thing, right? And so as in they're creating these conditions where this person thinks that, like, they and their partner have been given the same task to make a very short one-item list of positive qualities, and they do that, but then they're confronted with their partner has come up with 30. You know, this, like, very dramatic, overachieving student response to the prompt. Now, is this a perfect way to create this sense of being over-idealized? It's not. Like, there's definitely some issues with this, but I think it's really interesting.
Like, is it I'm moving away from you because I'm so embarrassed you didn't know how to follow instructions?
Right, maybe. Yeah.
Or it just makes you feel uncomfortable to have somebody say so many amazing things when you're like,
maybe
whoops,
that's,
I
well,
only
that's what
did
they're
one.
getting
Or maybe
at.
you're like, yeah, I only did the one. Oh, no.
Oh, God.
Yeah. In studies 2 and 3, they found that there is a sweet spot for idealization. That was only when it comes to abilities, specifically, like idealizing a partner's ability at sports or music, and not necessarily personality traits. But they found that either too little or too much idealization of a person's abilities was linked to lower relationship satisfaction, less willingness to accommodate a partner's needs, and more feelings of being, like, threatened, like your own autonomy and independence being threatened. Now, of course, I had to dive into, like, but what's that sweet spot? And basically the researchers found that, like, if you perceive that your partner thinks you're a little bit cooler than how you see yourself, that's the sweet spot. You don't want your partner to think you're, like, way cooler than you think you are, and you don't want them to think that you suck more than you think that you suck. You want to feel like your partner thinks you're just, like, a little bit cooler than how you would rate yourself on the coolness scale.
Damn,
Okay.
Dedeker. But both of these studies are like gut punches.
Why? Why is that one a gut punch for you?
Well, because I am dating someone right now who very much talks about the fact that, like, he does not want to put anyone on a pedestal. That, like, that's very much a thing that he doesn't want to do with partners in general. And I think that it has to do a lot with that feeling of being threatened and lack of autonomy and stuff like that. That to give over to the idea of pedestalization would mean that you would take away some of your own personal autonomy. And I have to say, I've been in situations where somebody idealizes me, and it does make me recoil. It does make me be like, I don't know about this. This is a little intense. This makes me feel like this person's whole world is about me, and I really don't want that.
Yes.
So that's fascinating to me. Of course, like, I agree also, you want that sweet spot. You want somebody who looks at you and is like, this person's awesome, but not that they're so awesome that they are every single thing in the world to you and they have nothing else going on.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point about why that sweet spot's there. And I can understand someone having an experience or just, like, learning something that turned them off of that idea of holding someone on a pedestal. And I agree that's good, but maybe it can result in them feeling like they need to swing hard the other way. And it's like, well, hopefully they could find that balance of, like, yeah, I can think you're cool without idolizing you, right?
Yeah.
I want to validate that though, because I think I think all of us have had experiences on both sides of this, right? And for me, I know the times when I have been in a relationship where I've very much put the other person on a pedestal, it has not gone well. Right?
You're right.
Like when I've over idealized someone, that means I'm more likely to self-sacrifice. I'm more likely to have a negative self-image. I'm more likely to not want to speak up and not have boundaries because I think, oh my God, this person is so awesome and I like barely deserve to be with them.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if you're with someone who also like intentionally or unintentionally takes advantage of that, then it can be a really bad situation. And so I think I've come away from those situations like really wanting to be careful about putting someone on a pedestal and idealizing them or over romanticizing them. And then, yeah, like you were sharing, Emily, that to be on the flip side of that also can be a turnoff, weirdly, because it can feel like someone doesn't actually know or love you. They love this ideal version of you.
Yeah, it is interesting. That sweet spot is ideal. And it's fascinating because I've been in a situation where I've been in the middle of both sides of this with two different partners at the same time. And that's a lot. It's fascinating to see the differences between how you act and how other people react to you in the moment. So I think if we can just all calm down.
Right.
But also understand that it's important to idealize people to a degree because that's how we love. Like I love how awesome my friends are. And how much I will say to people like, yeah, that person, like one of the smartest people I will ever meet. It's like I regularly say that about you too, you know, among many other things. Gosh. That's fairly ideal, I guess.
I think something that's worth noting here too is that this study mentioned specifically that this sweet spot had to do with abilities, which I guess would include something like saying the smartest people you'll ever meet kind of a thing that's kind of about an ability. Versus a personality trait, where it sounds like maybe with personality traits, there's no upper limit, I guess, to thinking someone's like, oh, they're just so kind, or they're so patient, or they're so something that's not skill-based. I don't know if that's what they meant here, but they specifically mentioned that this sweet spot thing had to do with abilities.
Well, do we think that this holds up outside of a romantic partner context? Like, Emily, do you feel like, would you be happy if New York thought that you were just like a little bit cooler than how you thought of yourself?
Oh boy.
That's a great question. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if like, I'm pretty sure I'm cool. I understand that New York is cooler than me and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that.
Okay. But I think what we've talked about already, where you've had this experience of like, even before you lived in New York, romanticizing it, idealizing it, moving to New York, and having maybe a more realistic take on what it's like to live in New York, and yet still having these positive feelings about your living situation. Like, does that fall into this like sweet spot category of idealizing a little bit, but not to an unrealistic degree?
I think it does, absolutely. I understand the things that I need to do to live here well, and that comes from within. As opposed to me trying to be like, well, I have to find all of these external things about New York to make it cool, to make it live up to that romantic ideal. It's more, I'm learning how I can thrive best here and how I can use all of the things that are wonderful about living here to my advantage, because they're always going to be there and I'm not going to be able to do all of them. But if I can enjoy what I can do, then it'll continue to bring joy to my life.
Yeah, that's great. I think with all of this, we clearly have a lot of thoughts and we've all had a lot of personal experience with romanticization, both with partners and with other areas of our lives. And I imagine that our listeners have experienced the same thing of like, oh boy, I can relate to a lot of these different things. I can imagine these situations. So we're going to move on to the last part of this episode where we get into what are some things that we can do to try to do like Emily was saying of like, how can we use that romanticization to help us? But then also, how can we avoid letting it influence us into making decisions that we might regret or making irreversible choices that we won't end up being happy with because we didn't know all the realities of it. Before we get to that, we're going to take another quick break to say, hey, if you want to discuss this episode with people, and there is some amazing discussion that happens in our Discord server, you can get access to that by going to multiamory.com/join, where for a sliding scale, you can become one of our subscribers there and get access to that community. And then also we have monthly video processing groups, early ad-free releases of the show, and more. So go check that out. And in the meantime, check out our sponsors, use our promo codes and our links, because that also helps support our show.
And we're back, and we're going to talk about what do we do with all this information about idealization, romanticization. So I went and looked through a back catalog, and because I was like, we did an episode about like how to have healthy relationship expectations like last year, right? And no, it was 142, which I'm pretty sure was like 6 years ago at least, maybe 7 years ago, maybe 200 years ago. I don't know. So yeah, you can go back to episode 142 about relationship expectations, and we're going to flag that as one that we should probably update and re-record pretty soon here. Because yeah, I think that that's maybe the general advice is like anything that you can do to be able to enter into a relationship with quote unquote healthy, reasonable expectations. I realize that that is subjective. That is something you got to figure out for yourself. But yeah, go check out that episode for more ideas about that.
Another thing to look at is your media and social diet, like taking an inventory of it. So there was a study that does suggest that people who consume more romance films or dramas are influenced by them, that they're more likely to expect very deep intimacy very quickly, intense and satisfying sex, and a sense that love has to conquer all obstacles, kind of the all you need is love kind of vibe, right? And I think that one's interesting to think about how the type of media, so not just the amount, but like what are the types of media we're consuming and how might that be affecting what we think we should be expecting or what it is that we think we would be happy if we had. So I think that's an interesting one to look at. And just, again, not like say, don't watch movies, don't read romance books, but maybe it's look at, are there certain patterns in these and do those line up with the things I want? And is there any way I could change that? And so this is, I would say, maybe like leading with the carrot instead of the stick for yourself. But you could say, hey, what if there is an area where I want to expand my horizons outside of this rather than looking for a book that's like showing terrible relationships that are super unromantic and everyone's having bad sex, that instead it could be, well, what if I just try to broaden my diet with more of a variety of other types of stories about people who are single and happy, especially if that's not like the focus of the story, or people in different types of relationships or just different types of books or movies or videos or even songs. And just kind of ask that question of like, where are your ideas about the ideal relationships, partners, lifestyle, city, job, having kids, whatever it is, like where is it coming from? And how influenced am I being by these things I'm consuming and enjoying without really picking them apart?
So this next one I called Put On Your Hat of Jade. So I think this is good for like, if you suspect maybe you're over romanticizing a lifestyle, a type of relationship, a place to live, just if you suspect that you can try on that particular lens of like, what are the ways that this could look negative? Or what would be my guesses about how this might actually play out in reality? If this is hard to do, it can be really helpful to get an outside perspective, so this could be things like, I don't know, talking to someone who's been kitchen table polyamorous for several years, talking to someone who actually lives on a commune, for instance. If you live in Southern California, I highly recommend going and doing a tour of the LA Eco Village. I've done a couple tours there because I think they do a wonderful job of both highlighting the wonderful things about living in an intentional community, as well as like the challenging things and the reality of it as well. Like you literally get to go into someone's house, right? To have a sense of like what their living conditions are like. So stuff like that, like seeking out some actual real experiences, talking to people who've actually lived out in the countryside that you want to move to or in the city that you want to move to. And again, it's not to say like go find someone who's completely sour and totally jaded and let them influence you, but like at least get a variety of perspectives to the best of your ability.
I love this one because I've definitely found when I've been trying to make certain difficult decisions that has been a really helpful one to find those counter arguments of like why working for this company sucks, or why doing this type of job sucks, or why living in this certain place or traveling to this certain place sucks, of reading those to kind of get a sense of, is that actually a thing that's really going to bother me or not? And trying to get a sense of it, right? It's always hard to know for sure. But I think kind of like with Emily, with New York, with Romanticizing New York, to go back to that one, there are so many movies out there that I'm sure you've watched that...
I've watched Six in the City front to back like 10 billion times.
Sure. And I'd say, though, like that movie kind of over-romanticizes New York life, similar to like How I Met Your Mother, where everyone's got like a little bit too easy of a life. But there's plenty of other movies like Taxi Driver or something like that that really show kind of the shittier side of New York life. And there's a lot of stand-up comics who joke about how shitty New York life is. And so I think you have access to more information to kind of see, are those things I feel like I could handle in exchange for getting the romantic thing that I want to do. And I think the same could be true with, like I said, jobs, relationships, even like having kids, of like, rather than hiding your head in the sand about how shitty that is, to really confront that head on, to get a sense of like, no, for me, that's okay. Like those will be okay, even if I know they'll suck sometimes. And that's a really valuable exercise.
Yeah, if you can get a trial run of any of those things, not that you can trial run a kid, but
rent a kid.
Yeah, rent a kid for the day. But I did come to New York for a month and lived with a partner, and I was able to, I was in the midst of like trying to find an apartment and find a job. And it was good to sort of see, okay, this is what the day-to-day would look like. This is what I would have to deal with when it's 30 degrees outside and I'm not used to how cold that is, all of those things. So it was good just to sort of be able to be here, not on a trip, but be here because I was, it was a precursor to me living here. This next one is called reverse romanticization. So if you are in a situation where maybe you're romanticizing a different life, like a different area to live in, or potentially a different partner, something like that, instead try to romanticize what your current relationship or living situation is. So this could be like an offshoot of the romanticize your life phenomenon. You can take out your Multiamory journal, write this down in there, write out a very, very romantic, idealized version of your life from somebody else's perspective. Maybe somebody sees you and is like, oh my gosh, they get to live in this amazing city, have this amazing job, live with an amazing, wonderful partner or multiple partners. How awesome is that? And try to frame it in that way. You can get help from a friend if need be, especially since some of your friends may see your life as something that is really inspiring and something to aspire to. So I think it would be important to just sort of play that out and see the connections that you can find to maybe my life is really awesome and the grass doesn't necessarily have to be greener in a different area or in a different place.
But that also doesn't have to be the whole point of the exercise. Like it's not about necessarily like trying to force you to be happy in a situation that you're not necessarily happy in, but it's to highlight like, are there things that jump out as you do this exercise that are actually easy to romanticize? Are there parts that are really difficult? If you find this exercise just extremely hard to do in general, that could be telling that like there's a lot in your life or in this particular situation or relationship that like you're really struggling with and really don't like. And like that could be telling of like maybe it is time to actually make a change. But it also could just be, this could be a different version of almost a gratitude exercise or a mindfulness practice, right? That's a little bit different from just writing out what you're grateful for, right? But it's sort of like putting on this lens of like, how would somebody else look at your life and find it to be their ideal or their romantic fantasy? I have to do this a lot when traveling recently because I've been so tired from travel that I have to remind myself that like, yeah, from someone else's perspective, this is very adventurous and very romantic and a great privilege. And I'm very lucky, right? And so sometimes that can help take the edge off of the harder parts of traveling.
I was very jealous of y'all's traveling this year because I want to, like, I'm about to travel, but I do wish that I could travel more, and I really want to travel more next year. But I understand where you're coming from.
I mean, it's helpful to hear that from you, right? Like, it's good, again, to have that, like, reminder.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, getting that outside perspective can help. I've also found sometimes it's hard to accept. Like, a friend who would always really emphasize, like, how cool I was and influential because of this podcast, and that's, like, great. I'm doing great in my life, and I just would want to be like, shut the fuck up. Get away from me. I can't handle this.
Wow. Goodness. Over-idealizing, and that made you recoil.
And that, like, tipped the needle into over-idealization.
finally, you can examine your perfectionism. So if you are someone who is prone to perfectionism, get curious about that, get on top of that shit. Realize that maybe it means that you want everything in your life to be perfect. And if it's not, then you're looking at all of the things out there that could be, or idealizing or romanticizing something that is not what you currently have, just because it's not quote unquote perfect to you. Find a way to embrace imperfection. Like New York, as we've been saying, New York is not perfect. Yikes. There are parts of it that I think for a lot of people would be really, really difficult to live here, but it's part of its charm to me. I understand that it's definitely not perfect, but it is, beautiful and gritty and intense, and I love all of those things about it.
Okay, folks, we want to hear from you. On our Instagram stories this week, we're asking the question, what parts of your life, as it is today, could be considered romantic by someone else? Really excited to hear what people have to say. Also, the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners about this episode is in our episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase, Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker, Winston. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennework and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.